Our theme this summer, compelled by love. And we love why? Because we should? Because good Christians should? No. We love because he first loved us. We love God because he first loved us. We love each other because he first loved us. And we extend that love to a broken world. Why? Because he first loved us. And our theme this month, as Pastor Ryan said, is the witness of our serve. And our theme today is the spirit of generosity. A couple years ago, maybe you heard the story. It happened at an Applebee's where a large group of Christians ate at the restaurant, and as happens, if you have a party of over 12 or 15, they added the gratuity right onto the slip. Well, the leader of that group crossed out the gratuity and said this: I give God 10%, why should I give you 18%? And that receipt went viral, and that waitress lost her job because of that. And since then, that pastor has apologized of that group, realizing they were wrong. And so the witness of our serve, generosity, is one of many, but one very important component of how we serve. And I'm going to get around to telling you how we should tip from now on, so stay tuned. Let's turn to John chapter 6, 1 through 13. Story that children have learned early on. It is an amazing story. These stories never get old. I always discover something new. It happened not once but twice in the Gospels, and maybe it happened several times, as if God needed to say to us, I need to do it more than once, otherwise you won't get it. Right? If I said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. He did it twice. It's the feeding of the 5,000. And here's how it reads. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee, the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him, because they saw the miraculous signs he had performed on the sick. He was a mobile hospital unit in one guy. Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples. It says the Jewish Passover feast was near. Jesus looked up and he saw a great crowd coming towards him, and he said to Philip, where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? And I love this next line. He asked this only to test Philip, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. I want you to know this morning, God already has in mind what he's going to do. He's only looking for someone who will believe him and obey. And every morning, you and I can wake up and say, Lord, let me be that one. He already had in mind what he was going to do. And Philip answered him, 8 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. Now, we're Americans, and so the scriptures, we don't get scripture sometimes because we see it through this lens of America. When we go to a conference, we host them here. Here's our expectations. You go out for breakfast, you come to the conference, within an hour you stop for a break and you eat. Then you have another hour, then you stop for lunch to eat, then you have another hour in the afternoon, then you have another break and you eat, then you have another hour, then you have a big dinner. And that's how we do things in America. Now, in the rest of the world and other times in history, that's not the case. I was in Africa doing a pastor's conference with 800 pastors crowded into a room, probably a third the size of this room, with only one swinging fluorescent bulb in the middle of the room. And it was hot, and they were sitting on hard benches, and we started at 8 in the morning, and they went all morning. And I remember around 11:30, I was thinking, well, good, we're probably going to break for lunch. It was really hot. Well, they didn't break. And they went on until 2:30, and at 3 o'clock, the bishop stood up and said, I think we should break for lunch. And we went to have lunch, and lunch had been sitting out since noon. It was beans and rice and some other stuff, and it was cold. No one complained. It was just fine. And then we went back after a half hour, and we sat on those hard benches until 9 o'clock at night. And at about 6 o'clock, I was thinking, well, good, it's about time for dinner. But we didn't eat dinner, and we went till 9, and then we went to that place again, and the food had been set out at 6 o'clock, and it was cold, and we ate it, and everybody was full of joy. And I realized, I'm not in Kansas anymore. And this is typical of the world. They had traveled long distances, and perhaps not 1, but 2, maybe 3 days without food. And Jesus looked up and he said, where are we going to get money? Where are we going to get enough bread to feed these people? Because they weren't just antsy wanting a break or coffee. These are people who were hungry and they were getting weak. And Jesus was concerned that they would even be able to make it home safely. And so Philip says 8 months' wages wouldn't buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. They wouldn't even have a bite. And 8 months' wages is, other versions have 200 denarii, which is a little less than a day's wage. And it's hard to figure out what a day's wage is. U.S. average, I know you came for this, U.S. average income per person is $27,000 per year. Now that includes all wage earners. The Social Security Administration, the National Average Wage Index, their number is 45,000. So 2/3, 8 months of a year, 2/3 of 27,000, mathematicians is what? $18,000, 2/3 of the National Wage Index by the Social Security Administration would be 30,000. But truly a denarii is about $20 a day. So $20 times 200 days, $4,000 to $5,000. And goes on to say, they'll give the number of the people in a second. But anyway, just then, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up and said, here's a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many? And here's my question. How serious was he when he brought this kid? You know, it's kind of like, was he joking? Because it's not only small, but barley loaves were the first grains around the Passover. So this is stuff that had just come out, and barley was cheap food. In fact, Pliny the Elder said that barley bread is food fit for beasts. And people who had been punished in the military were to be eating only barley loaves. I think our equivalent today would be hot dog buns. Here's a kid with 5 hot dog buns and 2 fish sticks. So you gotta sense the humor in Andrew's voice. You know, hey, here's a kid, like he really looked that hard. I don't think he went through the whole crowd, you know. But Jesus took him seriously. 5 hot dog buns and 2 dried fish sticks. And he said, have the people sit down. And there was plenty of grass in the place. And it says the men sat down, about 5,000 of them. And there had to have been women and children there, because women are always more interested in spiritual things than men. So we don't know how many there were. Maybe it's generic men for humanity. Maybe there were about 5,000. Maybe it was 5,000 men and women and children, 7, 8, 10,000. We don't know. I was stopped to think about that. How big of a crowd is that? Well, here's Cooley Law School Stadium in Lansing where the Lugnuts play. That's 75-27 I've counted the seats. That's exactly how many are in there. Plus the lawn out in the outfield, another 6,000. And I just think, fill that whole stadium, and those people have come to that ball game, and we have for everybody 5 hot dog buns and 2 fish sticks. You get the picture? And the disciples weren't sure if he was kidding. You know, was he? How serious? You know, if you traveled with Jesus, you never knew what to expect. But Jesus took it seriously. Have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass, and then it says he took the loaves, and look at that detail. He gave thanks to God for 5 hot dog buns and 2 fish sticks. Now, I know that's an interesting detail, because you go to verse 23, which we're not going to get to, but in the commentary, in the people's remembrance of this event, they remembered it this way: when they ate the loaves that Jesus gave thanks for. Isn't that interesting? God takes your little offering seriously, people. How many of you feel like your life is no more than 5 hot dog buns and 2 fish sticks? There's some filet mignon in this crowd, but God doesn't care. Who was it that said, little is much when God is in it? Who was that? I just thought of that. George Washington? I mean, who said that? I think it would have been the Elliots, the missionary Elliots maybe. He gave thanks, and they started handing out these hot dog buns and fish sticks to those who were seated, and they ate as much as they wanted, and then he did the same with the fish. And when they had all had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, gather the pieces that are left over. Don't let anything be wasted. Very interesting. He had in mind already what he was going to do. And so they gathered them, and they filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who'd eaten. And I always wonder, what do they do with those leftovers? Do they throw them out, or do the disciples say, hey, this is our meal for the next few days? But the interesting thing is they had more leftovers than when they started. When does that happen? What a story. The other versions, they ended up with 7 baskets full. And there's all of this deep theological significance, which I have no clue, except there's 12 tribes in Israel, 12 disciples. Perfect, I don't know. That's not what I'm here today for. But if you came for that, you're disappointed. What an amazing story. He had in mind already what he was going to do. The only variable was, is there anybody here that will take me at my word and obey me? Because Jesus, you read the Gospels and you wonder, what in the world is going on here? You cannot read the Gospels without scratching your head and say, what in the world is going on here? And I'll tell you what's going on. The King of the universe is breaking into our shriveled world. And just as God did to the people of Israel who were being led out of Egypt and fed them unlimited supplies of bread fresh every morning, Jesus is coming to bring, hear me now, a kingdom of abundance in a shriveled world of scarcity. And he calls you who follow Jesus, if you want to follow Jesus, you have both feet deep, you're neck deep in a world of scarcity, and he invites you to call and obey him to enter into his kingdom of abundance. Now, don't hear me sound like a prosperity preacher that says, if you just believe in Jesus, you're going to get that Cadillac. That's not what I'm talking about. God already has in mind what he's going to do. The only variable is he's looking for someone who will believe and obey him. The spirit of generosity, I think, it's another word for hospitality, which is making space in your life for another who's unworthy. That's what hospitality is. And it's not a nice place setting at their table. It's space in your house, it's space in your time, and it's space in your bank account. It's the only spiritual gift which every one of us is told to practice, and I'm convinced it's this reason, because generosity is the first evidence of a true believer's heart. Those who believe in God are generous. Those who don't believe in God, I don't care if you know all the words and you never miss a Sunday and you know how to dress, those who are not generous in heart do not believe in God. You say you believe him, but you're a citizen of a shriveled world of scarcity. Are you following me? There are 3 reasons for generosity. There are 3 motives. Here's the first one. Guilt. You've heard my pitch before. If anybody's feeling guilty, you can bake me chocolate chip cookies, and I'll gladly assuage your guilt. Lots of good is done in guilt, right? We feel like we got to make up for something. We feel like we've got to make up to somebody, and so we become generous. And a lot of good is done in the world out of guilt. But it's not lasting, and it's not of God. Here's the second motive, power. There are people who are generous in order to have power over a situation, in order to be noticed, in order to be appreciated, in order to have power over others. You can be inordinately generous, but not be radically generous of heart. And a lot of good is done in donations and giving, and that probably is the way of our world, that is giving, that is done. You heard Donald Trump in the debates a couple weeks ago. He gave a candidate some money, and all he wanted was, I expect you now to attend my wedding. And he was honest. That's how politics works. Everybody was horrified, but everybody who knows Washington knows that's how it works. But there's a third motive for generosity, and the motive is this. You know the King of the kingdom of abundance. And that is driven by obedience, gratitude, and trust. You give because you're overwhelmed by a God who has withheld no good thing from you. And not only has he not withheld, we give because he first gave to us, but we give because there's more to come. Right? We are surrounded by a kingdom of abundance. For most people, heaven's between here and Iowa somewhere. I'm convinced you've heard me say this. There's nothing after 12 years you haven't heard me say. I'm convinced that most church-going Christians do not believe in heaven. We say we do, but if we really did, how would it explain why we hoard so many things? Why would we park our expensive cars in the driveway in order to pack all of our junk in the garage? Only America does that. We don't believe in heaven. We hold on to what we have, and we hoard what we have, and we accumulate more of what we need, what we don't need, because we don't believe in the kingdom of abundance. Only 1.8% of Christians return a tithe to the kingdom work of God because they don't believe in heaven. Most Christians don't. If you're not tithing, this is not a sermon on tithing, although it could be. It's not because you're stingy, because it's God's money in the first place. You're a thief. If you're not giving your time, your life to Jesus Christ, it's not because you're stingy and fearful. You're a thief because it's His time. If you have a talent, whether it's numbers or arts or business or administration or serving or loving children, and you're not giving that talent to Jesus Christ, it's not because you're stingy. You're a thief. These are signs of unbelief. But when you know Jesus, and I look at this, and everything I preach, I try to filter through my own head and heart, and I always say, Mark, are you there? On good days, I'm there. Linda and I look at each other, and we get nervous about money, just like you do, but we give as the Lord enables us, and even more so sometimes, and we're always reminded, have we ever regretted giving to God? Have we ever been shortchanged? We are so rich. Last week I talked about this guy, J. Hudson Taylor. He was a contemporary and was greatly influenced by George Mueller. George Mueller opened up several orphanages in England. Bristol was his headquarters. And the story of George Mueller is he day to day depended on God's provision. By the end of his life, he had taken care of over 10,000 children, established many, many schools, and educated 117,000 children, so much so that the English citizenship criticized George Mueller for attempting to raise the lifestyle of the poor. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine? He was criticized for that. One story, amazing story I'll never forget. They daily never knew if they were going to have money. The orphans, they gathered together for breakfast and for prayer, and there was no food. They had the place settings, no food. And Mueller prayed in his prayer of faith and said, Lord, thank you for what you're going to provide. And I'm not kidding. At that very time, there was a bakery truck that had missed some orders, and they had extra food. They pulled up in front of his orphanage, knocked on the door while they were praying and said, I have all this food. Can you use it? He already had in mind what he was going to do. Mueller never made a public appeal for money. Hudson Taylor was so impressed by that, he was called to China as a young man. No gospel presence had made it into the interior China. But he, in prayer, in Hudson Taylor's great phrase is, how do we move forward? He says, we move forward on our knees. And he trusted God for missionaries, trusted them for the funds, and he also never made public appeals for funds. He was in America, in Chicago, speaking at a YMCA in 1888. Dwight Moody had put together the service, big crowd of people. Moody, by then, was well-known evangelist in the United States, and Taylor spoke for an hour, and when he was done, that said the air went out of the room. D.L. Moody stood up to take an offering. Now, I know what you're thinking. We should not take our offering today either, but Taylor whispered to Moody, he said, I told you that I don't want you to do that. And Moody says, you're missing a great opportunity. What the people are ripe, they're going to give. And Taylor said, let me address the people. Taylor went back to the podium. He said this. He said, I do not want you to give an offering because I do not want to take from your churches and your own mission societies and then give to me. But he said, if the Lord compels you to be involved and partner with us, that's fine. Well, anyway, there was a businessman in that crowd that day who was really relieved that he didn't have to part with his 20-pound note in his pocket. He went home, he tried to sleep that night, and he, restless all night long, and the next day mailed 500 pounds to raise Chinese missionaries to China. The amazing thing to me is George Mueller, above and beyond his own expenses for his orphanages, he supported himself 20 full-time China missionaries under Taylor. Isn't that amazing? And I love this letter that Mueller wrote. He said to Taylor, as an older brother who's known the Lord 44 years, says to you for your encouragement that he has never failed him. In the greatest difficulties and the heaviest trials and the deepest poverty and necessities, he has never failed me. But because I was enabled by his grace to trust in him, he has always appeared for my help. And I love this phrase. I delight in speaking well of his name. Isn't that great? I read that. I thought, oh my goodness, Mark, do you delight in speaking well of his name? The one who loved you first. The one who made you, who gave you his breath, who gave you your unique set of talents, your unique set of experiences, your unique set of perspectives, who every day stimulates your metabolism, that wakes you up and provides a planet and an ecosystem that is peculiarly designed to sustain you and gives you a certain amount of allotment of days and weeks and hours that you might give your life to him. And it's all done in love. Do you believe that? Oh, I delight in speaking well of his name. That's a great exclamation point to the arts of spiritual conversation. See, in 2 Corinthians 8, it's a wonderful text. God never calls us to do what he doesn't do first. We love, why? Because he first loved us. We're generous, why? Because he's first generous with us. And Paul says, see that you excel in this grace of giving. Your possessions, your time, your talents. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that through his poverty you might become rich. In other words, Paul says, and this whole chapter is about generosity and their giving. I'm not asking you to give because it's a command. I'm asking you only in response of what God has done for you first. Gear Up, we're going to do Gear Up. We haven't done it since 2011. We have worship. It's the greatest Sunday of the year. School's back in. People are back from vacation. We have Sunday school and worship as our regular schedule, the first Sunday with 2 services back to the schedule. And then we go outside for a party. We got old cars, we've got inflatables, and we're going to feed the community. And every year we have people who are in church who go out there, but we put up the signs and people pull in off M60 and they come in and we're going to feed them. We're not going to feed them hot dog buns and fish sticks. We're going to have guys here all that night before who are smoking pork. Not inhaling, but I mean, that would be a good story. We're going to provide pulled pork, barbecued pork, and a fun family atmosphere. And we're not sure how many we're going to feed. At first, we get nervous and we look at our budget. We don't have enough budgeted for this. What should we do? But as a staff, we decided we're going to feed whoever comes. And so we're prepared to send people on a quick journey to get that frozen pulled pork extra if we run out. And if we feed 2,000, which we probably, around there, but if we feed twice that, we're going to do it. Will you be a part of that? Because we believe generosity is one of the first tangible expressions of a witness of a people who say, we really do believe in Jesus. So how should a Christian tip? I preached on this about 8 years ago, and I had area restaurants thank me. They said, wow, our tips went up for about a day. This is what I think. I can't pull a Bible verse out of there to tell you. Wherever you go, whatever you eat, never give less than 20%. If you were to go to all the restaurants in this town and ask waitresses who've done this for a while, who are the worst tippers? I don't know what they would say, but I'm afraid they would say Sunday afternoon Christians are the worst. Starting today, I never want anybody to have reason to say that because of Spring Arbor Free Methodist Church. Is anybody with me? 20% minimum. Now here's my other rule. If you go out to eat on Sunday, make it higher. If you leave a scripture or a gospel tract, give 100% tip. Are you with me? I'm serious. I'm serious. Because generosity is the first tangible sign to an unbelieving world that this person knows something that I don't know. They may have a foot in a coming inevitable kingdom of abundance, when all I know is a world of scarcity and fear and hoarding. I love Paul Bunyan's quote. Oh, no, today I decided, then we'll get to the quote. Take out this piece of paper. I'm going to call you to it this morning, and I'm going to do the same. Today I decided, there's in the pew, there's in the bulletin, and this goes in the offering plate in a minute. There's different ways to be generous, isn't there? For somebody here, God may be speaking to you right now, I need to be generous with my time. I love this quote by Simone Weil. Attention is the rarest and purest form of a generosity. Just to listen to somebody. Or you may be, today God's speaking to you, I need to be generous with a talent. I've been sitting on some gift, and I've not been using it for the Lord. I don't know what that is, only you know. Write it down. Today I decided I can juggle pumpkins. I don't know how God's going to use it, but I'm going to. Come see me if you can do that. I'll be generous with my praise. There may be people around you who could use encouragement, just for you to tell them you're great. Or with my money. Maybe it's tithing to the Lord's work. Maybe it's tipping at a restaurant. Maybe there's a repentance here, but you may need to go home and talk to your spouse about this. But if you have the courage, put it on this card. Generosity. God is calling me to a new level of generosity today. Everybody could fill in something, right? Because it's not your time, your talent, your praise, your money. It's all God's, right? We're only giving what's His in the first place. It's John Bunyan who said, you've not lived today until you've done something for somebody who can never repay you. The only reason Jesus says, don't let the right hand know what the left hand's doing is that you can never give that way out of control for power, if you give that way. He already had in mind what He's going to do. The only thing is He's waiting for someone who will obey Him.